Okay, hi Dana, how are you? I am so excited to have this conversation with you today and just share with anyone watching, especially our rising 12th graders, as to how they could be spending their summertime and just getting some current information from you who lives within the college consulting world. So thank you for joining us. I'd love just for each of us to have a moment to introduce ourselves, and then we can get to talking shop. Why don't you go ahead and start just by sharing some of your background and what you're doing right now?
So I'm Dana Ponsky. I'm an independent college counselor. I've been in the field of college counseling for 10 years, formerly as a school-based counselor, but now I am out in the independent college counseling world. So I work with families primarily between 8th and 12th grade. And I also work with college students who are in the process of looking at either transferring colleges or looking to go to graduate school. So I've been doing this because I absolutely love it. I think it's the best job ever. So I try to, and I loved college too, and I loved the process of finding colleges and thought, well, if it was fun for me, maybe it could be fun for other people.
Yeah.
So my primary focus and goal is to reduce the stress in the process of college admissions and make it more about an individualized personal journey as opposed to something that everybody does and has to be done in the exact same way. So if we're talking about like 12th graders, for example, to me, everybody is going to be different. This whole experience that we're going through currently has been different for everybody. So there is no easy way to answer the question of what should 12th graders be doing, but there's many different ways that we can go ahead and look at that. So hopefully I'll be able to help you with that.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. So from where I sit, we have a company here that supports students through their journey of high school in general and just kind of helping them to do their best work. And then, of course, as students start to explore next steps, we certainly partner with you often to help us understand that process. And what I love about how you work, which really, really does speak to how Evolved works, is the personalization that you give to the process, right? Like, so we're not talking today about what everyone should be thinking about, or like, there's a golden checklist that everyone must follow kind of stuff, which I think is so important and valuable. And I just so subscribe to all of that. But, when I am looking at my clients and just, what we're all looking at right now, especially going into 12th grade, which is a year in which most students, have now sort of either finished or they're finishing their test preparation, right? They've had a really good emphasis on their academics in their junior year, and they've done their SAT subject tests, let's say, and they're kind of looking into this fall work, which is really going to be the time in which they spend identifying the types of schools that are best fits, right? And I know you're because I know you so well, and we've been working together. I feel like I already know your emphasis on asking students to travel and to really go see schools, because there's such a connection that one has to the environment in which you study, right? And so now that we're in this pandemic, I know many campuses are not necessarily allowing those kinds of visits. And I guess, not that you have the answer for every student, but, let's say we have a student who's going into their 12th grade year right now. What would you advise that roadmap to look like, given the reality of our situation right now, which is that it's difficult to kind of travel and really see these schools in person? Like, what's the alternative to that process?
I think the best way to look at it as you can only control what you can control in this situation. So a lot of times what I've been doing is for my students, usually this is the time of the year where we're talking test preparation and we're talking college visits, but that's not really on the board right now. And so for me, what I've been doing with a lot more of my students, I tend to be a counselor who finds that working on the college essay in the second semester of 11th grade can be challenging for some students because they're still in the midst of school and they're still doing AP exams. But I found that with my students, I'm working on the college essay now, because for many of them, some students are sitting in class 8 hours a day, some students are sitting in class 1 hour a day. And so there's a lot more time to kind of look at aspects of the college application process that I may have worked with them later on in the summer, but we're now doing now. So the college essay, the resume is getting completed. So that way it becomes whatever is happening during the summer just becomes something we push right into the resume as opposed to just starting from the beginning. But in terms of things like, working on the college list and doing visits, no, it's really hard to be able to like get on a plane, get on a train, or get into a car and get to a campus and be able to really see it. But there's some really excellent options online that have come out, well, they have been in existence, but are much more popular now. So my particular favorite one right now happens to be uvisit.com. So youvisit.com. And it has about 600 schools on it that are student-led tours. And on that, you can go ahead and pick whatever part of that tour you're really the most interested in. So if you'd like to go see what the gymnasium looks like at a particular school or the dining hall, you can actually click on a link and a student will kind of give you a virtual tour through that particular part of the campus. I think it's an excellent way to be able to see what campuses look like. You're not going to get the same feel from it, but you are hearing from polished students who are giving a proper tour. You're being able to have a visual representation of what that university looks like. They do throw in certain cultural aspects of the school, which are different than just, an admissions office giving you a tour of a school. I think, so I found that to be very helpful. I've also had a lot of students look at YouTube because a lot of universities have YouTube channels. And so being able to use tours that are already set up in that capacity, having kids just go there has been really helpful. And I think that depending on where your location is at, there are some schools where the campuses might be open in the sense that there isn't an actual wall around them. And so sometimes what I'll tell students to do is just, if they have the capability and they're not, in our particular case being in the New York area, it's a little bit more challenging. But if you're walking down the street in New York City and it's quiet, but you happen to be, near Cooper Union or NYU, you can get an idea of what those places look like. Or if you're out of the state of New York, you can go ahead and look at a campus maybe by just simply driving by it or driving through it. There's no offices usually open and there's no students around, but you can still get a feel of where it is, what the town looks like, and that sort of thing. So in the case of visiting, that to me is a really important way to do it right now. But I think this might be the first time in my career where I might say you might have to be applying to a majority of your schools that you haven't seen and then going to visit them after you've already applied. But I think we have to just be adaptable in this situation. And so going back to what I said before, focusing on resumes, focusing on essays, what you're going to be taking for class next year and making sure that's a good alignment. And then talking about what you're going to do during the summer and how to think outside of the box, because that's also not looking like it normally would.
Yep. So I also wanted to ask you, tell me a little bit, usually, a lot of schools are kind of moving toward early decisions and different things like that. And what are your thoughts about the timelines this coming year? Do you think anything is going to necessarily change on that? You mentioned just before that perhaps students, for example, the strategy will be to apply to a good amount of schools and then maybe, hopefully in the spring when you have your notifications, you might be able to go see them and sort of that would be your decision-making process, right? But, given the fact that a lot of students, especially in the more competitive schools, might be looking at really doing an early decision kind of situation, I know this is, again, probably a situation where it becomes really unique to the student. But overall, would you say that you're thinking from the advisement position, are you thinking about this any differently? Are you sort of, wondering as well, or do you have information that, colleges are sharing around the changes in their process or deadlines or anything like that?
Right. So my process hasn't changed too much. I'm looking at it as, let's just kind of, because I think part of that is that not very many schools have given any information there are schools that still tell us, we think we're going to be open in the fall. We don't know what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of information about once they are open, what is admissions going to look like. Mm-hmm. So I think for right now, I'm trying to just say, let's just keep going with the idea that we can only do what we can do right now, but let's just understand that it could be the exact same process as it's been in years before. Early decision typically is November 1st or November 15th. I think that there's a possibility that there are going to be some schools that are early decision or early action, which, like I said, typically is November 1st, November 15th. we'll actually push off maybe to December. But again, we're not sure, but I don't think for me and working with students, it's going to be that much of a difference. I'm going to still say at the beginning of August, let's start working, let's start getting things done. And if you get things done by the middle of September, the middle of October, and there's the deadline not till December, okay, let's work on other applications. Like, we don't need to keep pushing off this process, waiting to hear for other people. Let's just get things done and then push the button when we're ready because it fits into whatever that school says. I think that the harder part will be demonstrated interest. So for the colleges that do early decision, that's one aspect of demonstrated interest. And demonstrated interest is when you're showing a college or a university what about their campus makes it the right fit for you. So doing a visit, going to different information sessions, now doing virtual, registering for virtual meetings, just showing the school that you have a genuine interest in who they are. Some schools put that into their, they take that into factors. And I think that when it comes to early decision, they're going to maybe use just a little bit differently because they know students couldn't go ahead and do visits and they couldn't go ahead and do other things that are helpful in that process. So they might push things off, but we don't know yet. So we're just going to keep doing things as we've known them in that respects and just see what happens and adapt to it as it comes along.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about the college essay and sort of, I guess sometimes I think students, in my experience at least, don't always, I guess, know what they're getting into. Like, it feels like, we just have to write an essay, right? It's like an essay. I've written many essays in my high school career, right? So, can you demystify some of that process and sort of what does it mean to write a college essay, and why might someone need to have so much time to do something like this? Tell us more about that.
So to me, the college essay it serves two purposes. It's the window into your soul, and it is the part of your application that otherwise would not be come to life or be indicated in any other part of your application. It's really an opportunity for a student to share something about themselves that no other part of the application can give it justice. So what I do with students is I look at the college essay as not something that it has to be a very daunting task, but we have to look at it for what it is, which is a personal narrative. Students in school are not asked to write personal narratives. They're asked to write literary reviews and lab reports and historical representations of things that have happened and analyses, but they're not asked to typically write about themselves at length. But that's exactly what the personal essay is. It is simply tell us something about yourself that we otherwise would not know by reading another part of your application. There are interesting questions that will come out, tell us about a belief that you have and how you've challenged it or how you've been able to solidify it. There's questions about personal milestones that you've had that have really been important in terms of your transition into adulthood. There are questions that have been asked by the University of Chicago, which is, where's Waldo? That's a question that you can ask as a college essay. But I think the reality of the situation is that it doesn't have to be as daunting as hard, but it does help to have a basis of understanding what a personal narrative is. So when I'm working with students, we talk about that very briefly. We talk about, what does a personal narrative look like? You can write an I statement without getting, points docked from your paper. You're not to write about, if you have a grandparent who is particularly impactful in your life, you can go ahead and talk about them, but your essay can't be about them, and how to, indicate who the person is, but then tell about you and your, how you've been impacted by them. So there's a lot of different nuances. And in my particular case, I can have students be done with a college essay in a week because I do a process that's I do a free write for 20 minutes, a first draft, and then we talk through that first full draft. Then the second draft becomes, I rip it apart and do, a lot of editing and grammar and punctuation. And then we do one or two more drafts and then we're done. Some people will spend weeks and weeks and weeks. I think that once you're in the flow, and once you kind of get through that initial hurdle of thinking it's supposed to be something other than it is, which is just simply an indication of who you are, then a lot of students can get over that hurdle pretty quickly, and it's kind of smooth sailing until the end. But it really, I think, is more about understanding that it's okay to write about yourself. It's just for many the first time they've ever had to do it.
Right. It's definitely, I understand that. I feel like it's really hard when you don't have necessarily the experience of what you're talking about, like just even, or even just having the frameworks for what it is that you're like, where kind of the guideline of where are you supposed to go with this. Um, and so it kind of leads me to something else that I've been talking with a couple of my high school students about right now, which is just this time, right? And so I think it's very interesting that, I mean, no matter what time we're in, no matter what we're doing, students who are of high school age are always exploring their own identities and what it is that is important to them, and their own development is happening at on such a grand scale, right? But particularly during the pandemic, it has really offered an opportunity to young people to do something and make something of this time, right? And so it seems like it's also a really nice time to get your rising 12th graders to think about their impact and their development even during such a time, right? I mean, is that sort of something else that you're having conversations with students about right now, or do you think there's a way to spark any of this kind of thought if they're not having these kinds of, ways of thinking?
Right.
What's your feeling about that?
So in my conversations, because I have individual conversations with my students, this is where I think for me, it's very personalized. I have some students who are managing this situation that we're in like it's no bit like they were made for it. That they're really, they're like, oh, this is great. I really enjoy this. I like being at home. And then I have other students who are really finding this to be incredibly stressful, never got into the groove of school and having that transition. I have some students who are really struggling with the way of the world and what does this mean for future. If there's no summer, opportunities that were planned for the summer that are no longer happening, what does that mean for college? And unfortunately, we don't have answers to those questions. So there's really a lot of different experiences that people are having. And in my particular case, it's really great when a student is finding some positivity out of all of this. They're not overwhelmed by school. They're not overwhelmed by being at home with their family. They're not overwhelmed in general. And I think those are the ones who have the privilege of being able to really figure out, okay, what do I like? What do I want to try? What would be different? And I think that we can take advantage of that. But I think at the other end, when you have a student who is really struggling to get through 8 hours a day of school, tons of homework at night, like already having certain anxieties about the future, you can't really talk about, talking about like identity and summer plans and college. You really just have to meet them where they're at right now and just do incremental reassurances of things. So I have, like I said, I have a student right now who we're on his plan. We're not on our plan. And I think that I think as a counselor, that's really important. You have to be able to meet a person where they're at. So in the case of my students that are in the position of saying, okay, I've got this down. I was made for this. I'm doing really well. I think the conversation now is, how do you think outside of the box? And how do you look at your summer as an out of the box opportunity? So, volunteering isn't going to look the same, but how can you still volunteer your time and your effort without putting your health or your safety at risk? Because so much volunteering is face-to-face. And how can you do that? So a lot of it is looking at organizations that are outside of their area. So it could be across the country, it could be across the world. Sometimes it's looking at small businesses who are now reinventing their own businesses and saying, hey, I'm sitting in my house and your business is now sitting in yours. I can help you. And I can help you without having to pay, so to speak. So I think that it's really more about sitting and trying to come up with creative ways of both evaluating, like, what are you good at? What are your interests? What do you want to explore? And how can we do that in a new way that we've never thought about before? But on the flip side, looking at a student and saying, how can we go ahead and make this, work given where you're feeling right now? If there's anxiety, my job is not to increase that. My job is just to kind of quell what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes really good sense. And I feel like, something that I keep thinking about is just the personalized experiences of our kids and how actually different everyone has, really been and felt right now. It brings me just to think also about some students, I think right now are thinking perhaps they might there's an increase, I guess, interest in maybe taking a gap year and sort of thinking about what that might look like. And can you tell us, like, how do you work with families around that? I mean, as a mother myself, I feel like I would definitely look to someone with your experience to help me understand the pros and the cons of that in general anyway. But then, so could you tell us about that? And then could you tell us a little bit about ways that you're now thinking about advising families if that's something they're considering? Some of this comes from a place of wanting to be certain, right? So I guess it's important also to understand what's best for the child in terms of taking that year. I know some students might thrive, right, in a gap year, but other students might find that to be really difficult. I'm thinking of a student who I would think socially that would be very challenging to not continue with the peers, right, in terms of that trajectory. But in contrast, right, the parents are feeling a little bit nervous about jumping into such an investment when they feel that there's so much uncertainty in the world, right? And so what advice do you have for those parents and children who are kind of in this state of contemplating that gap year?
So I'm a huge proponent of gap years. I think they're great. So for the 10 years that I've been doing college counseling, a lot of my students are Jewish. And so a lot of them will choose to go to Israel for a gap year. And typically those experiences are social, cultural, and educational. So they are earning college credit while they're there. And I've worked with other students who've made the decision to decide to work and take classes at a community college at the same time. I've worked with students who've traveled to different parts of the world on certain kind of like missions, so to speak, volunteer missions. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at a gap year and the way you can formalize it. I think that, for families that are looking at it as I want to do this because I don't know what next year will look like. I think part of that has to do with, we don't also know what gap years are going to look like either. So if you're looking at a program that is in the United States that's very organized, because there are gap years in the United States, many of them might not happen in the same way, especially if a college is having trouble opening, a gap year is going to have trouble as well as overseas. So thinking about this particular rising students, you really have to be creative in regards to how you're going to go ahead and implement a gap year, whether it's going to be work related. And one of the challenges with work is that the population of working age people who's mostly impacted, is going to be significantly impacted by what's going on economically, are teenagers. They're already the ones who have a really hard time getting a job to begin with. They're going to have an even harder time finding one in the future. And so I think that you have to look at what is the goal of the gap year. You can't just go ahead, apply to college and ask for a deferral, but not have a plan. And so I think that plan has to be, you don't want to do if you're not comfortable with the university being open and doing their process, you're going to have to be okay with a gap year doing theirs that might be in contrast to what the college is trying to do. So you have to balance those two things. So I think when talking with families, especially over the next year, it's really about, what does that gap year supposed to be doing for your student? Is it supposed to be an opportunity for enhanced independence? Is it supposed to be more of like enhancing readiness for college in terms of maybe exposure to college classes without too much in-depth college experience? Is it supposed to be just volunteering based upon certain religious, preferences? What is the goal? Not every college accepts deferments of admission. So if you choose to apply and you ask for a gap year, the college is not required to provide it to you. There are going to be colleges that I have a feeling are going to limit the number of students who defer for a gap year, because you have too many, then you're not going to have enough people sitting in your seats this coming year. So there's a lot, of course, like everything's still up in the air, but I think that sitting with a family and talking about a gap year is really more about what is its purpose supposed to be, whether there's a situation that we're going in, whether there's a pandemic or not, and how do we make that come together so it fits the right plan for a student.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think a lot of what I'm getting out of what you're saying is that, that there is a good amount of advisement that you're offering that is specific, perhaps, let's say, to this time, but in the same way, much of what we're talking about would come up whether we were in this or not, in terms of really just making sure that whatever we're planning, right, we're making sure that we're addressing the needs of your child and what it is that your child needs for this continuation of their education, right? So a lot of times I feel like, where I guess, I can connect to some of the things that you're saying, in that I feel like a lot of times we parents as well as students can get consumed perhaps with the end game, right? Which is to like get into the college and to or take the gap year. And I think what I'm learning from when you're talking is, let's just reframe that paradigm and make sure that whatever we're planning academically is going to really meet the needs of your student wherever they are for their education, right? So like, this is what we're all doing here, is planning an education for this individual. And so you could go this way, or you could go this way, or you could go that way doing it, but it's all going to come back to that particular child and where they are and what they will thrive within ultimately, right? And I mean, I can relate to that because in my advisement practice, I always start with my clients saying, let's have a no regrets process here. Like, that's why we're working here. And we're talking about all of these different options that are out there. And then I can tell you why I think that this option maybe isn't the best fit for your child, right? Or, based on what they're telling me they need in order to learn well, right? I think that's such an interesting, like, part of this work, right? Don't you think? It's like where you're understanding the landscape, but even more so, you're really understanding a student and their what they're giving you in terms of the feedback on their learning experiences and sort of what they need to thrive. And then you can kind of make recommendations, right? To say, well, it sounds like what you're saying is you really enjoy this kind of learning environment versus this kind of learning environment. So did you know that this particular school has these things which really could help you pursue what you want to pursue, right? And I think that's so important, right, in terms of the advisement process. I usually do an interview of my students. Like, I'm always kind of asking them, like, I work with younger kids than you do. So I'm asking them really concrete questions like, what do you like? What don't you like? And what do you wish? And the wish thing never really comes out until they're like high school, but I put it down anyway, just in case. But usually it's really concrete information that I'm getting about, I like when we read these kinds of books. I would rather not have this much homework. I would rather have, math given to me this way. I don't like it when we do this. So that's, yeah, right. So like, how do you, so do you connect to what I'm talking about in your line of work? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. Mine is the same questions. I do, probably about an hour and a half meeting with all of my students. And in that meeting, it's, what's your grade point average? What are the quantifiable information, your grade point average, test scores up to that particular point, what you're doing extracurricular wise. But then my kind of transitionary question is, in a perfect world that we don't live in, what would you do with the rest of your life? And it's usually like, it tilts ahead. And if usually parents are there also, and it tilts their head. But my goal of that question is a gut reaction, because oftentimes you'll have students, especially in high school, when you ask what's their favorite subject, it's very teacher specific. If they like a teacher, they like a subject. And it's not really, you need to really know what they like and don't like. And sometimes that's really hard, because there's a lot of things they like and there's a lot of things they don't like. But when I found that if I asked the question, in a perfect world that we don't live in, what does your perfect life look like? Everybody has a visual in their mind of what they'd like their life to be. It doesn't have to be what we would, adults would deem terribly realistic. I've had students who say, I want a luxury yacht parked in, Bali, and I want to live in Bali and I'm like, okay, that's great. So my first question then becomes, how are we going to pay for the plane ticket to get there if we don't have our luxury yacht? Where does this luxury yacht housed? So asking questions that make them go, well, I don't know, I just got the yacht. And then it's like, oh, well, I would need to work in order to get the yacht. Well, where would you work? And then you ask those questions, and it leads to conversations that are much more detailed. And then most oftentimes you have students whose answer is, I want to live close to my family. I want to be as comfortable as I currently am if they're coming from a family of a certain level of privilege, economically and socially, and they have a comfort in their life. Or most of the time I have students who say, my parents have done a really good job, but I hope that I can help take care of my family in the future in the same way or even stronger. And then we talk about how do we think that could happen. So it's oftentimes students, especially in high school, are thought of as part of a community. And when they sit down in front of me, I have to push a little further to make them think less about being part of something bigger than themselves and just looking at themselves. And so I use questions like, tell me what your perfect life looks like. And then I ask them similarly for college. I say, what does your perfect college look like? But I ask them not to tell me the name of a college. So I ask them to give me visuals in their mind. Is it in a city? Is it in a rural campus? Is it big? Is it small? Do they see themselves on a stage? Do they see themselves at a football game every Saturday? So I asked them to kind of visualize for me what that perfect college life or experience would be. And because I'm like I used to say a bank of useless college information. Now it's very useful because I need it for my job. But this bank of information, I can then take what they're saying and kind of merge that together to then find schools that I think based upon their ideas, their grade point average, their test scores, I'm able to come up with a list of schools that kind of fit that in a perfect world scenario. Because I think that there are 3,000 schools in this country, and for every kid, there's probably over 2,000 that might actually work. Might not have the selectivity they're looking for, but in terms of location and place and what they want to study, there's a lot of schools out there. So I think it's important to be able to kind of, like I said, get the quantifiable information, but also the qualifiable information of things that are not that concrete. Because every kid has a thought and a dream at some point. Sometimes they're grandiose, sometimes they're not, but you have to be able to meet them where they're at and see how we can help make their dreams. It's not my place to judge or criticize anybody's dreams. And so my job is to see how we can make those happen. And usually if they want a luxury yacht, I ask if I'm part of the process to get the luxury yacht, can I use it sometimes? I usually get a yes.
For sure. Absolutely. Got to keep in touch with them, especially that kind of aspiration is really good. Yeah. So in terms of, this process this year, let's say we have, a lot of, rising 12th graders and their families perhaps watching, and we want to make sure we kind of sum up some of the most important pieces of their work this particular summer. What would you say that journey should look like? I know we're not talking again about generalizing this process too much, but certainly there are elements or ingredients for each student to have, which will make this process successful and not stressful come the fall, whatever scenario we're in. So what would that look like in your opinion?
So I think that honestly, at this particular point, getting through the school year is the biggest deal. If you're in the New York area, you've got about a couple more weeks. If you're in other parts of the country, you're already finished. So that's nice. I think at this point, it's really trying to take advantage of what opportunities are available to you in a healthy and safe way. So if you're in an area where things have opened up and your family is comfortable for you to participate in things, do so in a safe and mindful way, whether that is volunteering, whether that is working in a job, any number of things. But that's, really in consultation with your family or with counselors and advisors who are close with you. I think it's important to try to come up with something that's going to work, for you. If you're in the New York area where we're still sheltering in place, essentially, I think it's really more about spending a lot more time thinking outside of the box, talking with your parents, looking online, asking school advisors if you have those, asking independent ones if you have us, to say, what could I be doing? And really being open to the idea that there are opportunities out there that are now just being tapped in ways that we've never done that before. So that's hard. It's kind of like having to be a pioneer and how to figure out how to do that. But it makes for a great essay if you have to go ahead and write one. So I think
and may I just pause there? One thing I was just thinking about when you were saying that is I'm doing a webinar tonight with some teenagers just around what to do with an idea and helping them just help them to think about some of these things, right? And one of the talking points that I made was just that, yes, certain people might want to go out there and volunteer, or they might want to create something to offer the world. But there's also just as much benefit of using this time inwardly to develop skills, to pursue passions in the way, like, let's say if you're going to a liberal arts school, right? A lot of times you're just getting an education in a broad way around different types of ideas and subject areas, right? And so there's no also harm at all, in my opinion, in exploring cooking as something that you're going to do this summer that will help you gain culinary skills. Or, you know, if you want to learn how to do social media marketing, or you want to learn how to do an art project, or you want to build something, like, all of these are skills that you'll be honing, if, you know, albeit not necessarily improving, let's say, a community in a volunteer sense, but by building your own skills, you'll be able to serve your, you know, future jobs, or, you know, college settings in other ways, right? So there's other ways to think about these kinds of things than just your traditional get a job kind of situation.
Exactly. I've even talked with one student. There's some schools out there that actually ask you what you've read recently. Mm-hmm. And I have students where I look at them and say, use the time to read. Don't care what you read, but use the time to read, because so many times the response is, I don't have time to read a book. I don't have time to read multiple magazines. So like you just said, just take anything. You know, if you're good at playing an instrument, but you want to become much better, use the time wisely. I think that as opportunities keep opening in terms of literally our lives opening back up, don't be too hesitant to sit back and wait. Think about, okay, my family's not going to let me go ahead and volunteer in a hospital, but how can I support, you know, healthcare workers in a different type of way? And so I think that there's definitely opportunities for that. And I think also during the summer, it's really looking at, you know, doing the preparation for your essays, doing preparation for essays, doing preparation to get a resume together. So that way you have a document that will go with you for life, but also is going to be the same document you use to, you know, fill in information on various applications. I think also the other part is to, by August, try to come up with a list of at least 8 to 12 schools. This is a generality, obviously, but 8 to 12 schools that you may not have seen, but have done enough research on to say, I think that this is going to be the right fit. This is going to be the right fit for me right now. And, you know, you don't necessarily, I always say to people, this is a very individualized experience, and you have to be careful about asking too many people's opinions. But I think that this is an opportunity to kind of, if you're interested in a certain subject, contact, you know, professionals in the field where you're interested in, and say, you know, if I'm interested in marine biology, what are the best colleges for that? You may not be schools you recognize, but if a professional in an industry is saying, this is a really great school for this, and it's a school you've never heard of, you probably still want to apply if it's well known in the field. So it's stuff like that, and doing the research and just taking advantage of that. For some people, it's really fun, was for me. Some people it's not, but it's necessary anyway. And I tell students and parents that it's the student who should be leading this charge, not the parent, because if the student is putting in all the effort to apply and they end up going there, if they're not the ones who've really felt a connection to it, but a parent did, or a family member, it's not going to be a good situation. So it's really, students should be leading the charge. And if you choose to do nothing, that is okay. But understand that if you choose to do nothing and you choose to do a lot, we still don't know what the outcome will always be. But you have to be okay with the choices and the decisions that you make. And if you're still not ready to get out there and do something, that's okay. Just do what you do really well. And I think that's where I think everyone will be all right. Like I said, there are 3,000 schools, and I can pretty much guarantee that you will get into at least one.
Absolutely.
It works out okay.
I love that. I really do subscribe to that, though. I think there are multiple places for everyone, just like in our own careers, right? I mean, I know in my career, for example, I could think of at least, a dozen different places that I could be contributing to, right? If I needed to at any moment, right? So it's like, just as there are multiple places to work, there are also multiple places to become educated. And I love it's actually really comforting, I think, to know that there are multiple best options, and that, and that also, you can certainly work within your own pathway to arrive there, which is really, I think, totally something you and I are on the same page with. So just like as a closing thing, just because, you know, I do these kinds of conversations with people who are in our field of education, advisement, and work with students, especially around the personalization of education. And I've just really enjoyed working with you because I feel like you have such a really important skill set and everything. But, you know, I think it's also really inspirational to see other women in business and other women who are doing really interesting pieces of work. And so I just want to celebrate that for, you know, for our closing remarks here, and just share that, you know, just for those kids who are watching, can you tell, I guess, a little bit about your journey? And I know you were working in schools and then you decided to go on your own, and sort of what has been benefit of that, and just can you tell your story a little bit, because I think it's helpful for kids who are listening to know about that too. Yeah.
So I'm like born and raised in Connecticut, blah, blah, blah. So when I was in high school, I did not have a college counselor. I do come from a family of parents who did go to college and graduate school. So for me, it was part of the conversation in our house was going to college. It was just what you did. And I was that kid who did what I was supposed to do. And the process of applying to college, this was back in the 90s, where you, there was no internet. So you had this big, gigantic 3,000 page plus book, Peterson's Guide. And I read the whole thing, thought that was fun. You can make judgments and criticisms on that later. It's fine. But I went to college. I went to the University of Maryland, and I was very actively involved as a student leader on campus. And I absolutely loved my college experience. And part of what I did was orientation advisor. And that was helping students acclimate to a university once they chose to go to the university. And I thought it was the best job out there. And I was an American studies major, so I studied American culture. But I quickly realized what I studied and what I wanted to do did not have to meet up. I could take a passion and interest in American culture and study that in depth, but I could also be in education and work with college students and be able to do that as well. And so I went to graduate school for college student personnel at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, flattest place on the earth. So I was there for 2 years, but while I was at Green, I worked at the University of Michigan as a career counselor. So I'm a trained career counselor, and did that and really got to understand how, you know, students are being successful in college and then helping them to transition out of that. After that, I ended up moving to Miami. I worked at the University of Miami and then at Barry University, which is another small Catholic university in the city. And I was the director of orientation and first year programs. So I kind of went back to that thing that I got involved in when I was a student, which was helping students get into a university setting. But one of the things I noticed is that there are a lot of students who go to college who have no idea how they got there. So I started shifting my focus from being on the college side towards helping high schoolers get a better sense of how to own the process of getting into college. And just by happenstance, basically, I had an opportunity to become a college counselor in a high school. I had never done it. I had actually never heard of it because I did not have one. I never heard of this. And so I just took a job on a whim. I once was told that we don't always get the jobs that we're the most qualified for, but we get the jobs that we just apply and you never know what happens. It was one of those. And I walked into this job and I fell in love, and that was 10 years ago. And I've worked in independent day schools for the last 10 years, but have always helped people on the side with college counseling. And I just realized coming to New York, there's tons of opportunities, and I took advantage, and I am fortunate to have saved every penny and started my business. And so for the last year or so, I've had Dana Ponsky Consulting Services, and we work with students to assist them with getting into college, getting into graduate school, and helping them find employers that are going to be the right fit for them so that they're highlighting the best versions of themselves. It's been the best experience. I'm learning something every day. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, but it's fun. It's not easy. But to be able to do what I love and to constantly be learning every day is a privilege that few people get. And I'm taking as much advantage of it as I can for myself, but also because I think I have a lot to be able to offer. And I want, to be able to help other people realize that this opportunity could be in their pathway as well. So.
Sure.
That's me.
Yeah, I love that. I really connect to that in terms of just that when you have a skill set and you have a particular service that you could offer someone else to improve their life and you can make a living and a business out of it, that's really a very important place to be, especially as we sort of define the educational opportunities of students. And I know you give a ton of your time and attention not only to your clients but anyone who asks. And it's really, I mean, that's another benefit, right? I feel like as small businesses, especially during this pandemic, I've been asked to really support many small businesses in my community, and I do so knowing that not only am I supporting, let's say, this person in business, right, like this mom or this person who has a small business, but I'm also, providing that person with the ability to do what they do to not only help the people that they are in business with, but by them being successful, they're able to affect that particular industry in a really positive and important way. I know you do that. And it's something that, like, I just, I think it's worth celebrating and sharing this story with young people, because I think it's a lot about that. Like, when I think back to my own career, I remember the people when I was a teenager. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was very much a part of the Montclair YMCA, and I did almost everything there because everyone gave me opportunities. They said, "Oh, Mary, would you like to work the front desk? Oh, would you like to work the after school program? Would you like to teach swimming? Would you like to run the swim team? Would you like to do?" And I just kind of was like, "Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Yes, I would." And so every time I was put in those positions, right, I was given the experience of serving someone else. I was given the experience of teaching someone else at a very young age. And so every time I think back, I realize that all of that experience really has supported me in being able to serve those I do now. If I hadn't had that, I wouldn't be kind of where I am now. I know that you can connect to that. So I think it's also just important for young people, like, if you're going into college next year, again, it's not about the end game always. It's really just about and even business isn't, right? I mean, it's hardly ever about the end game. It's probably almost about the process.
It's the day-to-day. It's surviving day-to-day.
Yeah, how best to do this. So, I think it's really a privilege to be, in this space. And I hope that the 12th graders listening, or the rising 12th graders who are listening, their families understand that it's not a chore to go through this. Like, it's really not. It's really about being in a process that is going to affect you in ways sometimes you can't imagine. Like you were saying, like, I couldn't imagine taking this job and like where it would lead me. But just because it fills you up somehow, right? Like, I really enjoyed those roles I had. And so if I can say anything in closing here, it would just be, hopefully you who are listening can use these pieces of advice just to spur some activity that is really going to connect to you and make you feel very, filled up, right, in your work this summer. So thank you, Dana. This was so fun. I know we're going to do another one, so it'll be fun to do another one. We're going to talk about college considerations in the high school admissions process, and just, I know some students are certainly planning who are much younger, so we're going to talk with even that group of kids. So if any families are watching this who are also have children who are in that 8th grade going into high school arena, we'll be having another conversation available as well. So Dana, where can people find you?
So it's very easy. You go to consultwithdana.com. It's my website. From there, you can go ahead, learn all about me, get a lot of information, but it also gives you an opportunity to reach out to me that way. I'm very accessible. I work with students both New York, around the country, and overseas. So it's very easy to reach out to me either by email, by phone. I do Zoom calls. I do snail mail if you want to. I'll do anything to make it whatever the family needs. I'm happy to do. There is a contact form on my website. You can fill that out, and I will get back to anyone as soon as possible. So it's very easy. Consultwithdana.com.
Awesome. And we'll put all that information in the notes on our YouTube channel too. So thanks again, Dana, and I will speak to you very shortly. We'll stop recording at this moment.